So this is the first half of the presentation on the cardiovascular system. We're going to go over some background on blood and some general background on the cardiovascular system. So the first part is the function of blood. Blood transports dissolved gases, nutrients, and hormones and waste to and from all the tissues of the body. So we're going to find in the endocrine system that the endocrine system uses the bloodstream to transport its hormones around so that it can send signals to other parts of the body. We're also going to see when we do the respiratory system that you have waste products returned to the lungs from the blood. So blood regulates many aspects of homeostasis, including body temperature, pH, and electrolyte levels. So it's going to help to maintain your body. A blood clot can result in response to an injury through the use of enzymes and other clotting factors. White blood cells and antibodies provide immunity by disabling, removing bacteria, viruses, and other foreign compounds. All of this moves through the bloodstream. This picture is actually really interesting because this is from the first, the H1N1 flu, and this is back in the early 2000s. So it's pretty pertinent right now, but blood stabilizes body temperature, absorbing heat from muscles and distributing around the body. So this thermal imaging, you can see right there that they're seeing the temperature in different locations around the body. And obviously somebody's going to, people run at slightly different temperatures, but most people, 98.6 is pretty standard. Composition of the blood. Blood is made of 3 components, which can be seen when it is spun through a centrifuge. You have plasma, white blood cells, platelets, and red blood cells. So plasma is a mixture of 92% water, proteins, nutrients, electrolytes, and waste. And these proteins include albumin, which helps to transport lipids, globulin, which includes antibodies that attach to bacteria and viruses, and fibrinogen, which is part for blood clotting. Okay, and you see right here that you, in the picture, you have the plasma, you have the buffer layer, and then the red blood cells. So red blood cells, or blood cells, erythrocytes, are also known as red blood cells, transport oxygen from the lungs to the body. Bioconcave disc shape allows them to move through capillaries. Each cell contains a hemoglobin, which is a protein that binds to oxygen. Okay, so you could see blood with oxygen versus blood without oxygen. Hemoglobin causes the red color of blood and red blood cells. The shade of red changes slightly if the blood is not oxygenated, but is never blue or purple. So that is a myth, all right? Oxyhemoglobin versus deoxyhemoglobin. Deoxyhemoglobin, it does look bluish when you look at your arm and you can see your veins. That's where it kind of comes from. But, if you were in a vacuum and you cut your hand, it wouldn't come out blue. Okay, so you could see that red, it's a deeper, or it's a brighter red color, and then it gets a little darker when deoxyhemoglobin. So for the purposes of labeling, though, we're going to just refer to it, we'll always use deoxygenated as blue, and we use oxygenated as red. Obviously, if we use red for both, it would make things more confusing. Using blue for deoxygenated makes it a little bit easier. But understand that those are the 2 examples. So the red is without with oxygen, and if you see on the right there, that darker red is without oxygen. Leukocytes and platelets. White blood cells, or leukocytes, circulate through the blood and fight disease and infection. Leukocytes are larger than red blood cells, and they have a nucleus. So red blood cells do not have a nucleus. They lose their nucleus, but leukocytes do contain the nucleus still. Platelets are fragments of cells that arise from very large cells produced in the bone marrow. They aid in clotting. So your platelets are going to help your blood to clot if you have an injury or a cut. All right. So red blood cells are anucleate, so they can't divide by mitosis. So they cannot, okay, they cannot continue to divide on their own. So the erythrocyte production occurs within red bone marrow and is regulated by the kidneys. So we talked about red bone marrow. That's where your red blood cells are going to be produced, in red bone marrow. So we see right here, blood cell production is controlled through a negative feedback cycle. A drop in O2 levels in the blood. Kidneys release a hormone, erythropoietin. Bone marrow releases more red blood cells, normal O2 levels, kidneys stop producing erythropoietin, blood cell production stops. Okay? Now what's interesting, erythropoietin, you can take it artificially, and that is known as blood doping. Lance Armstrong took EPO, which is artificial erythropoietin. It helps put you through this cycle to increase your red blood cells. Obviously, more red blood cells is going to be effective in cardiovascular activities. Okay, so you see EPO is going to be common in cardio activities. You're not going to see Hafthor Bjornsson, who just set the world record for a 500 kilogram deadlift. He's not going to be taking a lot of EPO. Now, while he needs a lot of oxygen, his body, it's such an anaerobic activity that EPO is not going to be the drug that he chooses. All right. Whereas somebody who's doing Olympic running, marathoning, cycling, those things are all going to need, they're going to need more red blood cells, and EPO is going to be something they use. Blood types. The surface of each red blood cell is covered with proteins called antigens. These are identification markers used by the body to determine self versus foreign cells. You see how the O group, they don't have any antigens on them. Now, this is going to be important when we talk about antibodies in the bloodstream. Okay? And you see how AB has both antigens on it. All right? We use that as an example of codominant when we did evolution. So, person's blood type is a result of the antigens, right? A, B, and O. So, if you have blood type O, you have no antigens, but your body produces antibodies against blood type A and B. Now, there are preliminary studies out that there's something to do with that, and that's why, and I'll post an article about it, they're finding that with the coronavirus, people with blood type O, they're seeing a trend. Now, don't sit there and say, oh, I have blood type O, I'm not going to get it, or I have blood type A, I'm going to get it. No, but they're seeing a trend in something about blood type seems to have an effect, and I'll post an article about it. It's interesting. They're doing preliminary studies on it. And then the positive or negative is determined by the Rh presence on the antigen. So you see right there, O negative has no antigens. A and B each have their respective antigen. AB has both. And then AB positive has all of them, has the Rh antigens, and so on. Blood type is detected through a process known as agglutination, okay, where it clumps up. You could see right here, the antibodies are proteins that react to specific antigens. Clumping or agglutination is a positive result. So you see how the positive result there in the positive circle is a bunch of little clumps. The negative is none. I used to demo blood typing in school, but the problem is I'm O negative, which means that in all three, the A, the B, and the Rh tube, or whatever we end up using, it all just looks like diluted blood. So nothing actually changes. So blood transfusions. Transfusions transfer donated blood from one individual to another. A hemolytic reaction takes place when the immune system of the recipient attacks the blood cells from the donor. This can be minimized by matching blood types. So we see on this chart right here, a patient can safely receive blood that contains the same or fewer antigens. So O negative can only receive O negative because O negative has antibodies against everything. So what ends up happening is their O negative only gets O negative. But because AB positive has no antibodies against any of them, A, B, or the Rh, they can get blood from anybody. So this chart kind of shows a positive, all right, O positive can get from O negative or O positive. So if you're positive, you can get the positive type and the negative type. If you're the negative type, you can only get the negative type. Okay, and you see that in the chart right there. And you see that the O negative as the donor has every single box filled, and AB positive has all the boxes filled as recipient. So blood disorders, when diagnosing blood disorders, doctors will order a complete blood count that analyzes the number of blood cells in the patient so they could do the blood counts. There's a really crazy documentary on HBO about Theranos. If we were in school, we would be watching it and we would be doing a project on it. I recommend you checking it out on your own if you have HBO access to it. It is crazy what this woman is doing with blood testing, or what she's pretending to do. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but we'll have a little discussion. It's not required, but we'll have a discussion about it in terms of on the discussion board what people think of it. Anemia can have a wide variety of causes, including lack of iron intake, deficiency in B vitamins, malformed erythrocytes, which is sickle cell anemia. And blood donors are tested for anemia by placing a drop of blood in copper sulfate and see how long it takes to sink. And the last thing on this part is leukemia is a form of cancer that causes overproduction and release of immature white blood cells. The white blood cells are non-functional, increasing the rate of infection, and red blood cell and platelet production decreases, affecting oxygen transport and clotting.